Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Korra Rewatch video. This one's going to be for K207 Beginnings Part 1. And as I said in the last video, if you followed my channel for any length of time as well, you know I really love Beginnings Part 1 and Part 2. When I think I did my top 10 Korra episode video, I think I placed Beginnings Part 2 as my favourite. And if you force me to kind of combine the two of them together, I think Beginnings for me is probably my favourite thing in Avatar. I just think it's a very strong, contained story that they managed to tell very well over the course of 2 episodes. And I think what's so good about it is that it has a bit of everything that, for me, makes Avatar my favourite franchise, basically. And especially, for me personally, in terms of my tastes, in terms of how I like my kind of universes and the information within them to be presented, it's heavy world building here. It tells an important story. So, everything that happens here is very notable. It's information we care about as the audience, that being that it's covering the origin of the Avatar. It's covering the origin of bending, basically. It's giving you an insight into, here's what the world was like when humans and spirits were, together, and how that actually worked, what kind of ancient humanity, in a way, was like. And then, as you progress into episode 2, you get much more information on the spirits, with the introduction of Rava and Vatu, what exactly the Avatar is, getting that proper origin story. But while it's heavy on, lore and world building, it doesn't forget about, I think, the core of what Avatar is, which is, very strong kind of character development and well kind of done characters and arcs and development between characters, in that we get some very good moments here, in that a little bit of dynamic between Wan and his friend Jaya, and the kind of inspiration there, kind of showing you the initial potential of Wan as a character, that even though he is this sort of troublemaker to a degree, in that he's stealing food and he's the one questioning the way things are, and the whole idea of we don't have the power and we never will, and you can't change that, basically just accepting their kind of lot in life, but Wan is unwilling to do that. Then him meeting Ai and the kind of friendship that forms between between those two, as this first basically human and spirit kind of friendship, and how it helps to sort of enlighten Wan. Wan becomes the person he is because he knows the dynamics with humans and knows how they feel, but also gets the spirits now. So he is this very kind of, in a way, complete character once he goes through that. Then Rava's introduced, and they do that very well. Obviously, it's not necessarily an aspect of part 1 because they only meet right at the end, but with the arc overall, it's such a great journey, which I'll talk about in the next video for part 2. And there's humor along the way, there's some fun action. The animation in this episode is really good because Studio Mir return for this 2-parter. And what's interesting is obviously that it's them returning, so the animation looks different than the Studio Pierrot stuff we'd had up to now, but it's also Studio Mir doing a slightly different art style to represent it being so far in the past. It's still the Studio Mir Korra style, it's just altered to make it look more slightly different because it's older. Especially in the backgrounds, you see it in the way they kind of draw the elements, and other small aspects like that, especially the line turtles, how they're drawn, look very kind of unique and different, and I think it really works to help present it and get it across. So that aspect really made these episodes feel like they put a lot of thought into this. And I think another aspect of this that I really like is that it can come across a little bit like, oh, we just get this random origin of the Avatar side story in the middle of this book, and it's just so separate than everything else. But it's not really, because ultimately it's Korra's arc here. Where they've placed her is that she's in this position where she's basically, has amnesia, is separated from the Avatar spirit, and needs to kind of recover, and so needs to basically have this sort of spiritual journey. And so, in a similar way to the web comics from Avatar set in between book 2 and 3, Escape from the Spirit World, where Aang has to go on a spiritual journey to reconnect with his previous 4 past lives, Korra kind of goes on this spiritual journey to, I suppose, find out the origin of the Avatar, to reconnect with the start of the Avatar cycle, to make her connection again. So I like that, in that it's it's a Korra's version of that from Avatar The Last Airbender. And it allows us to tell this very important story, but also it really helps to give Korra the context that she needs once Unalaq's plan is like fully revealed, in that obviously over the course of this backstory we meet Rava, we meet Vatu, so she learns more about what the Avatar actually is, what the spirit inside her is. She learns that her, I suppose, main enemy from at a base level of the Avatar is Vatu, and learns about harmonic convergence and the idea of what happens when both portals are kind of open, like to a degree, that the portals kind of cause a bit of an issue here, and it's something that she actually has to deal with. So it gives her the important information that she needs without just having to like have another character explain it to her. Instead, she gets most of it from the backstory, and then a little bit of it from the Fire Sages on Bonti Village. So it really helps to inform Korra about what's going on here, and then show her that, like, this is the battle that the first Avatar fought. You now have to participate in this same battle because it's 10,000 years later. What are you going to do? And then, I think most importantly, Wan's choice with the spirit portals, and then Korra's choice later on in the book with the spirit portals, is like her big kind of spiritual moment of the world is in a very different position from back here to now, and she makes a decision based on what she's learned from Unalaq, learned from her journey here on her own, and makes a decision, a kind of worthy Avatar decision, one of Korra's biggest decisions that she makes as the Avatar within this book. So I don't feel it's just this side story. I think it really helps to like link everything together, in the same way that the Skeletons in the Closet backstory from book 1 also helps to sort of link things together. Like all of the plot points suddenly come together here. Yukon, Noatak, Izaman, Tarlok, what happened in the past, what happened now, it's all because of that incident. And similarly here, we're dealing with spiritual stuff, the world being spiritual, the world not being spiritual. It all stems back to this, and this point in time where we meet the humans and spirits. The spirits effectively have control of the physical world as well as the spirit world. So humanity is in this fairly low point. And if not for the Line Turtles, humanity probably would have gone extinct at this point in time. And I think it's clear from like context that this has been the state of the world for a good while. I'm not going to say it's been like thousands of years, but at the very least, generations have come and gone enough for the current people to just accept that this is their lot in life, basically. That we live on the Line Turtles, some of the hunters go out a little bit into the spirit wilds to get us food, and that's it. That's just the way that we have to live. That we're all that's left. We don't know if there's any other humans. As far as we're aware, this one Line Turtle has done us the honor of like allowing us to live on top of him, and they treat him as this heavily respected, ancient, being, basically, that they more or less allow to act as their kind of judge in a way, as well as just an overall protector. And it's another aspect of like the world building that's so good within these episodes, is that the Line Turtle was such an amazing concept from Avatar that obviously some people felt was kind of almost came out of nowhere, was kind of fairly unexplained. But this here retroactively very much helps to explain and give more context to why a Line Turtle would return at that moment, the significance of him granting Aang the ability of energy bending, and how it links back to, I I suppose, some of the Line Turtles' initial kind of moves, and it's, to me, it's one of the most interesting subjects in all of Avatar. I think I have like probably 2 or 3 different Line Turtle discussion videos up on my channel, talking about all of the different, I think, mysteries that surround them. For one, it's an animal, but it's a sentient animal. The Line Turtles can speak, and they seem just as intelligent, if not more so, in a sort of like wise wisdom way than humans. They're powerful. They demonstrate like that they have abilities in the same way that, like, you know, I suppose the difference between like a firebender and a dragon is that the dragon's ability of firebending feels more like it's just a natural ability, that they have this kind of built-in structure where they're just able to breathe fire and have some control over it. Whereas with humans, it comes across as more of like a magical ability where they can spray fire out, but then they can just manipulate it completely at their will and do whatever they want. And the fact that the Line Turtles like directly show like an ability to be able to like grant people bending shows that it's a physical being on like a whole other level. We learn, I think, in Beginnings Part 2, Rava refers to one of the Line Turtles as like an ancient one. So they more or less seem to establish that like the Line Turtles are like almost like the first physical beings almost, and that there's a significance to like the reason behind why they are protecting humanity, in that when we get the reveal that there are actually dozens of Line Turtles, there are dozens of human settlements, it's this organized thing by the Line Turtles that at some point they realized that humanity was in danger and that they needed to step in and help humanity at this point in time, up until their era came to an end, which is the Avatar coming into being and the era of the Avatar beginning, as the person who more or less changes the world to the point where the Line Turtles protecting humanity in the way that they do here isn't necessary anymore, in that it won in getting rid of the spirits from the physical world, allows humans to actually just thrive on their own, and there's no need for like a overall protector, but just for someone to sort of monitor the gap between humans and spirits. So I think it all works so nicely and flows together really well. It's why I very much completely disagree with anyone who kind of thinks that this kind of like ruins some of the already established lore from Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think I've said it multiple times how much I feel that Avatar was always exceptionally vague when it came to the spirits, the spirit world, any sort of mechanics that relate to that sort of stuff. It always just felt like they're very specific examples that they're giving here. I don't feel they're giving us any rules or anything like that in Avatar, whereas here it feels like they are kind of establishing some of those rules. They're giving us a more general view on things, because nearly every spirit we meet in Avatar is more or less like a very powerful spirit, whereas I like here that they show that there are just normal spirits as well, that don't have like superpowers and aren't like the spirit of some like, you know, really notable thing. It's just, here's a carrot spirit. Here is just like one that looks like an animal, more or less. And then some of them are just more or less, you know, very, you know, typical spirits of what you'd expect them to look like. Not all of them have to be a Ko, a Wan Shi Tong or something like that, but there are those ones. It kind of creates, this helps to really create this sort of hierarchy of spirits in a way. Some of them can speak, some of them can't, some of them are more animalistic, some of them are just, they're almost like objects in a way. They're just kind of like these little balls that just like float around, and it's like, is there any intelligence there or not? And it's interesting to think about that stuff. It's the one thing I think that still needs to be covered in any sort of detail, is just specifics surrounding the spirits in terms of like, is there culture here? What do they do as such? Because like they're basically like immortal as far as we're aware. Like they don't age and die, so they just live on as long as they want. You know, it's obviously established that they can be like destroyed to a degree, because like you can destroy their form, but it just changes them into a different form. And then they more or less say that, I think, Unalaq's dark spirit bending technique is the only way to, like, I suppose, properly, like, out and out destroy a spirit, to just use that dark corruption technique where you just eliminate their spirit. But even then, we never really saw that move pulled off exactly, so we don't know if that exactly works. But it seems like they've already established this duality between humans and spirits, where humans can become spirits by leaving their physical body behind over time. Spirits can actually choose to become mortal and seemingly gain a physical form. So there's just an overall, like, world building of, I suppose, how, like, reincarnation, the afterlife sort of stuff works in Avatar that still needs to come out. But here it really helps to establish stuff, because the big thing that I think some people make the mistake of in this is thinking that, like, this contradicts what was set up in Avatar. That, like, wait, if the Lion Turtles gave people bending, then like, how are, like, Oma and Shu, like, the first, earthbenders, when we clearly see Wan get earthbending here, and, like, it doesn't really seem like it's Oma and Shu kind of time period type stuff. What about the fact that the dragons are meant to be the first firebenders, and so on? It helps to explain things here, and I think there's one scene that just very clearly and bluntly explains it all to you, and that is the kind of montage sequence where Wan is firebending, and the hunters are actually talking about him, how, like, the spirits are kind of, like, protecting him. He's friends basically with the spirits, and they explain that, like, he's this completely different type of person with the fire, and you see him next to a dragon, copying the dragon's movement and kind of gaining that martial art, more or less establishing that Lion Turtles granted humans the raw ability to bend, to manipulate an element, but it is humans learning from those specific animals that demonstrate these abilities as well, that really turns them into benders, that forms the martial art that really, creates, I suppose, the power of the element. The difference between the hunter and Wan, someone who just throws fire in the way that, like, if you had firebending, you'd probably just go rather than trying to, like, do any sort of fancy martial arts, versus Wan, who shows very clearly the ability to block and calm down fire, to manipulate it around his body, and just show a control over the element rather than just shooting it, basically. And that's the distinction here, that Oma and Shu are not the first persons to ever earthbend. They're the first people to learn from the Badger Moles how to earthbend properly, how to truly bend, basically. That's the interpretation, and I don't think it's, like, contradictory or anything like that. It's just the difference between a raw power, a raw ability, and then actually creating, like, power behind it. That clearly people had the ability to, manipulate water, but until they studied the moon and how it, manipulated the tides, the push and pull of the water, they gained this sort of, like, philosophical understanding of what the element is that they're bending, and so have a better, idea to control it, of, like, smooth, be flowing, push and pull, control over your emotions and stuff like that. And then, like, okay, so base it on, like, Tai Chi, and so that it begins to develop. Firebending, you have to be a little bit more aggressive with it, so, you have a more kind of high energy fighting style behind it. Air, you also want to be flowing to a degree, always moving, blah, blah, and so on. It explains that without going into, like, full on, like, here's some questions you may have, let's answer every single one of these questions. It's just that one scene of Wan going from showing him throwing fire in a certain way to actually bending fire with the dragon, and how much more powerful he is after that, is very, very, I think, cool to see, and I think explains things quite nicely without being, I think, in any way contradictory, because it's just simply the case of the Lion Turtle granted people bending but took it away, and then Wan sort of becomes the first, permanent firebender in a way, and then when the others decide to leave, in that really cool sequence where we really see a lot of stuff happening in the world, Wan inspiring people that they could actually survive on their own if they have the power of the element to protect themselves. They don't have to be stuck in the Line Turtle City. He helps to inspire what effectively is, to a degree, the start of the Fire Nation. It sort of gets a little bit more confusing later on because they more or less establish that most of these people were killed off. But I think you can see that enough time passes that they have families. Not everyone was involved in the fighting as such. So I think even aspects of like Wan's kind of people did survive. And they would be, I suppose, the true first people of the Fire Nation. Then obviously the fact that there are dozens of Line Turtles, that means that there are at the very least like 24 Line Turtles or something like that. So there were clearly multiple firebending Line Turtles, multiple water, multiple air, and so on. So it's not just a case of the ones Wan went to are the only ones that are like important, but I think the ones Wan went to probably end up being the ones where like there is the true origin in a way of like a certain, like each of the nations more or less, like the Siwang Desert is now like this kind of very significant place because it's like the first place where Wan got earthbending, and it's where the Avatar got their earthbending from. And while it maybe not be the central area of earthbending, it's obviously this important place. So it more or less explains that sort of stuff in that they don't really point out like, oh, we're going to like the western side of the world. Here's a Line Turtle, like basically where the Western Air Temple would be. They don't hit it as on the nose as that, but I think that's more or less the implication here, that the air Line Turtles are flying, and they're in specific sections, and they more or less there probably is like 4 of them in the north, south, east, and west. The Fire Line Turtle probably is to a degree maybe close to the Fire Nation, or maybe it is on one of the Fire Islands. We're not entirely sure. I get the impression that like Wan is on the main continent of the world, so he probably is still in the Earth Kingdom. Because I really think the actual formation of like the countries to a degree, the actual nations in terms of where their land masses are, only happen like after Wan's death, with the whole big battle that happens, which again I'll talk about later on. But the starts of like the hints of things here, of like, here is, in my opinion, like the origin of the people who later become the Fire Nation, with Jaya and his people going out. We get the establishment of the ability of spirits to kind of jump into humans and alter them, which is sort of being discussed a little bit in Turf Wars. They're not really going into like any sort of depth that I would want, but it's at the very least an interesting ability because it fundamentally is the basis for what the Avatar actually is, in that Rava going into Wan is effectively the same thing as Ai going into that hunter, except Rava doesn't have as many like distinct visual aspects to her, in that she's basically just this like kite-shaped spirit of like pure white light and energy with some blue markings on her. So it sort of makes sense that like the Avatar, the only real manifestation of the visuals from Rava that come out are the eyes glowing, tattoos if you have them glowing, and then at the super spiritual times, the whole body sort of lighting up, and you can see the Rava kind of marking kind of come through at times. And I think that's really cool how they established this mechanic to help explain the fundamental idea of how a spirit and a human actually go about like combining, but also the issues of it, that it's not just a simple case of Rava stays inside an Avatar just because they're friends, that there is this sort of deadly aspect to it, that if a spirit stays inside a human too long, they kill them. They basically overload them with energy, that you're suddenly putting the energy of a spirit into a body that already has like chi energy within it. So there's this overload aspect to it, which they begin to cover in Beginnings Part 2, how Wan gets around that, how he can only carry the power of one element initially, but how he learns to kind of gain more power within himself, and eventually how harmonic convergence kind of solves that problem and basically allows the Avatar to... The distinct aspect of the Avatar as a person is effectively that they they are like the one person in the world who just has the capacity to hold enough energy to basically have all four elements plus a spirit inside them at the same time, which is something that not everyone can necessarily do, and it creates an interesting dynamic with like the dark avatar that comes into play later on. While like, why doesn't Unalaq try and get the other four elements? Well, it's because it would take him the same time of training that Juan does to actually, get himself up to the level where he can hold all of those elements. So there's that. As for specific plot points in this episode, as I said, it is a lot of world building, but I do like that Juan's character, they set it up that like, okay, here's him sort of making some mistakes at the start. He's stealing food because very clearly the Chews sort of being in charge of the Fire Lion Turtle here is an interesting plot point, because you wonder like, how did this happen? Why does the Lion Turtle like allow this to happen? In that he judges people when they're brought before him, but it doesn't seem like he directly has any sort of a role in terms of like deciding who is in charge as such. He more or less just accepts that like, okay, if that's the way it is, fine. I'll help solve some of your problems and help to protect you, but you decide on stuff yourselves, more or less. He's not going to interfere and be like, this is unequal. You have to step down as leader unless he does something really, really cruel. But still, it is this case of, Juan and his friends and a lot of the other people are, not living the high life exactly, whereas the Chews are. They have like whole stockpiles of food. They don't have to worry about getting food, and everyone else does. So there is just that sense of like injustice, and Juan inspiring people to kind of change things. And change is kind of like a big theme of what's going on here, of like Juan initially having these ideas about like being terrified of the spirits, but then realizing that when he stays with them, it's not that bad. And the spirits as well, like I just that moment of him seeing Juan defend Mula, the cat deer, and him stepping in to save Juan, and that friendship developing because they sort of realize that their like preconceived notions of each other are different. And it's basically the exact same dynamic right now in like the comics and stuff like that, with the humans and spirits, of just they've created such a rift between the two of them that just there's no real ability right now for anyone to really step in between them and just say like, we're more similar than you think. Can we please just attempt to get along and see what happens? But they have to, I think, get to a point where they can do that in the comics, and I really want them to, because that's like a big plot point. But yeah, that obviously helps to inform Juan, because he ends up being this like incredibly like enlightened person, as we see in like the next episode, because when he meets Rava at the end, there's very much this impression, you get a little bit of it here and you get more of it in the next episode, that like Rava herself sort of looks down on humans, that she is the spirit of kind of light, she's the good spirit, the good really powerful spirit, but she still falls into the same trap that I think most spirits do, of just, judging all humans, painting them all with the same brush, that, they're all just a lower life form that, we roughly are here to sort of protect in a way, but, we're just looking down on them, they don't really matter. Whereas Juan has the perspective where he can kind of see that there can be a friendship between humans and spirits, that there's no need for like a sense of inequality between them or anything like that, and the idea that they can actually be friends. Humans can be useful just like spirits can be useful. And her, obviously her views on humans come out in the next episode, and how Juan helps to sort of break down her views. And I like how it is more of an arc of Juan teaching Rava rather than Rava teaching anyone else, because this is the escape from the spirit world for Yang Chen dynamic here, of Aang asking Yang Chen, why is the Avatar always reborn as a human? Would it not be better if the Avatar was an all-powerful spirit who never died? Would that not create a better situation with the power to do anything, and then they'd never actually die like the Avatar does? And her answer, I think, helps to explain things here, of just like, part of the reason why the Avatar is effective is because they have compassion. Because they live as a human, they understand humans can make mistakes. They understand emotions, and because of that realize why it's important to protect humans, and spirits. Whereas, the spirits, there's definitely the impression that it's not too much of a focus of them to like be compassionate or really show emotions. And it's always been this weird dynamic with spirits of it never really feeling like there's too much of that there. We clearly see here the capacity for them to like be friends with people and stuff like that. But humans definitely seem like there's a greater potential for them to kind of be selfless like this, and how Wong sort of teaches Rava that humans can be like this and helps her to understand, which gets her on board to the point where the Avatar can actually be what it is in the next episode. But the I suppose cliffhanger here of Wong separating Rava and Vatu, and the reveal that like you don't have any idea what you've done. You have just let the spirit of darkness free for like the first time in more or less forever. You have put the world at risk here. And even just the visuals of the second this happens, like Rava shrinks, Vatu grows a little bit, of just this is the dynamic that they're going for here. Rava has kept Vatu in check, but now that he's free, chaos is immediately beginning to spread, the evil is beginning to rise, it happens quickly, and it's going to be a real struggle to fix this, and Juan has to fix this mistake that he's made here. And I like that as the setup of like we've finally at the end of this first episode been introduced to like the key players. This is Juan's quest now, is making up for this mistake where he thought he was helping this spirit that was in trouble, but because he didn't know the full extent of what exactly was happening here, there's a problem. The other thing with the Avatar that I like, and it's I get to a degree why some people complain about like the core conflict of this book and the introduction of Rava and Vatu as like literally the spirit of light and literally the spirit of darkness. It being very like, it's just out and out 100% light versus dark. No subtlety to it, no nuance. I don't mind that because Avatar has always been to a degree like that, yin and yang, the ocean and moon spirit being just, the black and white, fishes and so on. I think it, at a base level, has been like that, and I think it makes sense because, of what the Avatar actually is. It's meant to be this very pure being. The reason why the light is white and so on, the reason why the goal is always to like bring peace and balance to the world is fundamentally because that's what the spirit is. I always felt that the speculation prior to Beginnings even coming out was from people was always that the spirit is either going to be like the spirit of light in some way, or it's going to be a very direct, the spirit of like the planet, the spirit of the earth in some way that is there to protect this planet. They decided to go more with the light idea, but in doing so they more or less basically say that the Avatar literally is what the definition of like Avatar from like Hinduism I think is, of like it's like a deity in like physical or like human form basically, and that's effectively what it is. It's slightly altered because it, rather than it just being like a deity who's now become mortal, it's effectively Rava as like a godlike being put into the body of someone else, but there's still being two kind of personalities in there, but still that's more or less what it is. So it kind of fits their new definition of the Avatar and what it is in this show, but it also is like a Avatar. So I think that's really cool as well in that sense. But I love this episode. I think Beginnings Part 2 is the better episode because it's obviously where the big important events happen. But I'd never take away from Part 1 and what it does, because it gives you really good context on just the way things were before. I think you had to have this setup of before all the big action stuff happens with the introduction of Rava and Vatu. I think you needed this episode to just set up where Juan came from, how he became friends with the spirits, and the type of character that he is, and now you have this more developed character able to, I suppose, properly go on this big mission in this next episode. But there's still great world building here. This is where we more or less get the origins of all the bending stuff out of the way in this one. We get the first, immediate suggestion of like what the origin of the Avatar is going to be, because I think it's fairly obvious. Like, even though they aired it as like a two-parter, if there was a week gap between Beginnings Part 1 and Part 2, I think we would have immediately known that just, okay, this giant white spirit that is saying it's the guardian of peace and balance in the world. Okay, there's the Avatar spirit right there. It's very clear, but then how did they become one is obviously the big question. How does that specifically happen? We've already got the establishment of like the mechanics of that spirits can jump into humans. So is it literally just a case of like they form a friendship and they just stay merged? But then they've already said that can kill someone. So how do they get around that problem? So they've set up like a sort of mechanics of the world type plot that needs to be gotten around, as well as we have to stop Vatu from basically bringing complete chaos to the world. So excellent episode. I love these episodes. I don't really agree with a lot of the criticisms that they get. But yeah, that's basically all I have to say about Beginnings here. I feel like I like these episodes so much that I almost feel like I can't do them enough justice talking about them. That there's always something I'll leave out, some element or detail that I'll forget to talk about, because I like these episodes so much. It's just this raw kind of positivity that comes out rather than like anything else. So I love these episodes, but what are your thoughts on Beginnings Part 1? But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.